100 years ago, quantum physics started to emerge, right? So the end of the 1800s, in fact, they started to examine and contemplate and think about what the implication of certain processes that they'd already established in science. How could they possibly work? And the idea of quanta of energy, of packets of energy, started to emerge. As with all things, all times of change, there was a massive upheaval. And so if you look at the history of the world around, I'm not going to talk through the history of the world, but if we look at the history of the world, late 1890s through the early 1900s, we come to 1914 very, very quickly, and we get the first big, worldwide global conflict of the First World War. Very few decades later, we get the Second World War, which, of course, quantum physics, the playing with the atomic structure of reality, played a really, really big part in ceasing that aspect of change, because the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. And then you've got decades and decades of that 20th century being played out to the backdrop of development of quantum physics, theoretical quantum physics, and actual practical physics, where mankind was learning to play with these structures of reality. And to start with, it was very much like the chaos of a toddler crawling through a nursery, throwing building bricks all over the place, where perhaps a bigger brother had made a lovely building, and the toddler comes through and just obliterates everything in its path because it doesn't know any better. And humanity was very much like that, playing with the structures of reality, of the quantum energy. Now, in the 21st century, it's time for the humanity to grow up a bit and kind of actually understand what it's playing with. And the amount of research that's been done in installations like the one at CERN, and the global interest and the global understanding and advancement of knowledge about the quantum physics, what that is doing is actually pulling science inexorably closer to seeing the world from a very, very, very different standpoint to that which we've been traditionally able to see it from. This does not mean that Newtonian physics has no place in it. Newtonian physics is absolutely rock solid for everything that happens on the material world at the macro level, at this dimension. But underlying that is the quantum world of the very, 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 very tiny. And science is starting to understand the implications of the fact that this world is actually built from another dimension, at least one other dimension. It's many more than that. We exist in a multidimensional reality. The big danger in thinking about quantum physics and talking about quantum physics in this environment, right, when we relate it to spirituality, is that in the spiritual world, quantum physics has been run up the flagpole as this is the answer to everything. This proves spirituality. Some of the things that spiritual folk have always said are possible, this proves that these things are possible. Things like telepathy, things like remote viewing, these sort of things. That is not the case. And if you talk to a scientist, somebody that is actually practiced in logical thinking and looks at the worldview from a considered evidential-based objective viewpoint, quantum physics does none of those things. However, quantum physics is significant and is important in this process that we're going through as a species, because we are finding our spirituality again, and part of finding the spirituality again is actually understanding our role in being able to manipulate the environment that we live in. So what the physics does is say that it is highly likely that there is some interaction between the human brain, human perception, potentially the role of the human observer, and what they call the waveform collapse of structure. So it creates the structure from the waveform collapse. So it goes from a wave to be a particle, right? So the reality around us might solidify into a certain set of information that we can interact with, and it may be that we have the influence on this process. It doesn't say that we do. Quantum physics doesn't say that we do that. Quantum physics doesn't say that our minds affect our reality. It doesn't say that. But what it does is opens the door to the possibility that we might. And the big thing about quantum physics is that, as yet, the one thing that quantum biologists are looking for, particularly for, let's say, I mean, it's not the one thing they're looking for, but the significant thing they're looking for is to try to find the actual physical mechanism of how the physiology that we have may affect our realities at the quantum level. And they're looking at things that are called microtubules in the brain. So they're very, very, very tiny structures that may actually be key to the way that we perhaps do influence. Now, having said all that, that's all kind of coming at it from a pseudo-scientific but sort of logical thinking. If we look at it from the other point of view, as somebody that actually believes in remote viewing, has experienced this kind of telepathic-y type connection, has encounters with things that just don't make sense. If we look at it from a spiritual point of view, then yes, there are things about remote healing, about the way that any therapist can work with a client and promote change and a development towards wellness, which are inexplicable from a scientific point of view. And that's all there is to it. Virtually everything that I'm talking about and that I talk about on the YouTube channel, for example, is all about the subjective nature of one's awareness. So in other words, it's completely unique to each individual person. And there is a way of seeing the world from that perspective. And that is at complete odds with the scientific way of seeing that world. But both of those ways of seeing the world are being forced to come together, because what we talk about in spiritual terms is starting to be explored by those looking at quantum physics and quantum theory. Because at the end of the day, there seems to definitely be a way of relating to one's environment, one's reality, that does bear out this theory of what you think and how you think can affect change. Now, yes, of course, that it's not only about quantum physics, you see. There's all sorts of things that, the human beings are amazing mechanisms. And half of the way that we perceive the world is all about our cognitive processing. It's not based on the wonders and miracles of quantum physics. It's about the sheer physics, the practical psychology or physiology of how we function. So part of this seeming change that we can affect can be put down to the way that we see the world. And what that's about is actually changing the way that we think as individuals. So it's not saying that there's a magic thing out there called quantum physics that actually makes things appear to be a spiritual truth. It's saying, well, look, quantum physics is part of this. Because quantum physicists at some stage in the next few decades will say, look, we found something here. And what they find there will bear out, I'm sure, a lot of the things that we experience as when we get into a spiritual mindset and mind frame, right? But that spiritual mindset and mind frame also has, as part of it, all the cognitive biases, all the things that psychologists and psychotherapists, etc., and neurophysiologists or whatever they are, that understand about the way the human brain physically works. It's not just saying quantum physics is the answer to everything, or spirituality is the answer to everything, or psychological profiling is the answer to everything. As with all things, it is a mixture of everything that we are aware of, and a balance of everything that we're aware of. And that's why the spirituality is so important, because it's got to counterbalance all of the logical, objective, independent, separate scientific thinking that has been influencing the global species. We're not objective beings. We are subjective beings. Our spiritual purpose in that sense of being happy, is to experience our individual emotional processing. And collectively, this is the mess that it's caused by being not attached to it. So not understanding that processing has an effect on the external world. So quantum physics doesn't prove that it does or doesn't, but it will at some stage be evidence to say that yes, decades of spiritual thinking actually has a grounded, purposeful point. It makes a difference.
Thank you.